Speaker.
Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Green Party will oppose this legislation. There are some positive aspects to the bill which we do support, extending the youth justice age, albeit with the restrictions that are in it, and we would like to see those restrictions moved. Extending the age of care, assuming that care is safe, is not, we can understand the provisions for that. So we support early intervention and for families and whānau where children are unsafe and need to be protected. We do not support the permanent removal of children from their families. It is an absolutely outrageous proposition in this bill. It is typical of National to combine it with a couple of other provisions that will be supported. But at the fundamental provision in this legislation is the deliberate intention to remove Māori children from Māori whānau for good. It is an assimilationist policy in this legislation. It is a crime against the rights of the child and their whānau. It is a breach of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It is extremely serious. As a result of the seriousness of these proposals to Māori whānau, I have moved a motion to amend, I have proposed an amendment to the motion that the bill go to social services. It should go to Māori Affairs. Absolutely, this bill should go to, because those other provisions we all generally agree with. They're pretty much, they're not that controversial. The fundamental premise of this bill is to take from whānau our babies. And so it should go to Māori Affairs, which is the only safe committee for Māori whānau to speak to about the consequences of this legislation. I hope that other members, if there is an opportunity, support that motion. There is a very abusive and difficult history of state intervention with Māori children through the whole colonisation of this country. Right from the very beginning, when there was requirements for whānau to send their children to school, their Māori children to English-speaking school, where they were required to learn English, based on a theory that assimilation was better for those children, what it led to was a significant destruction of our own language and our own tikanga. That was the first of the, beyond the colonisation itself, was the first of those serious interventions against Māori children and their right to be Māori in their own country. So much later, the mokopuna of that first wave of assimilated children suffered from government policy in the 50s and 60s and 70s that said, that was a slightly softer version, saying that Māori whānau, particularly because so many of them were poor and rural, were not able to provide for their children the kinds of lives that Pākehās decided was better for them, and so those children were taken and put into SIFS care. Some for superficial and terrible reasons, but reasons that were largely about prejudice and racism against Māori whānau. And those children were taken and put into state care, into institutions that were largely occupied by Māori children, run by Pākehā government agents, and those children suffered appalling, horrific abuse in those institutions. All the children, Pākehā and Māori, who were in those institutions. We have seen the results from the confidential listening service, which has only skimmed the very surface of the crimes committed against children in care, just how appalling state care was for those children. They were taken, they were placed in institutions and with foster families, and they were horribly abused, particularly Māori boys. That confidential listening service report highlights the particular nasty attacks on Māori boys. And now, another generation later, the mokopuna of those children are being subject to another legislative government intention to remove those babies from their whānau. Because Aunt Holly and her people think that it's better that we don't take care of our own kids. I mean, that's the only excuse for removing the whānau first placement priority that has been in legislation, hard fought for, and has now been taken out. It runs alongside The existing legislation that actually was put in place by Paula Bennett some years ago, the new Deputy Prime Minister, that allows for even more babies to be taken from their mothers at birth, in the birthing units. Right? So there has been a significant increase in Māori babies being taken from their mothers at birth, and with this legislation that removes the kin and placement priority, those babies will never go home. Doesn't matter how well that whānau is, doesn't matter how much work that mother has done to get herself well, it doesn't matter what else is going on, those babies will never go home. It is a stolen generation again. We have had waves and waves of the state telling Māori that the way we raise our kids, that our love and our connection to our babies doesn't matter as much as it does for Pākehā families. And the trick to this is, of course, the numbers. More than 60% of the kids currently in care are Māori children. We know that the kids today in state care are not safe. There are hundreds of them missing. There are hundreds of them on the street because SIS doesn't know where they are, right? They are being kept or taken into inadequate places. There was a report last Thursday about a SIS worker who took a kid, 14, and placed them in a well-known Mangal mob home. That kid then committed a crime, a burglary, and was convicted in the youth court as a result of being placed by SIS in a Mangal mob home when his grandmother had said, "I will take him." His grandmother said, "Give him to me, I am his family, and I will help to take care of him." And even under the existing rules, which are supposed to prioritise kinship placement, that child, because at 14 you're still a child, that child was placed in a Mangal mob environment, committed a crime, and has suffered the results. If any provisions change in the law that reduce the priority of having our kids placed with our whānau and our hapu, they will suffer terrible consequences for that state intervention and assimilation. They will be left out. They will suffer abuse. They will have nowhere to go to have their lives repaired. And the whānau will have lost our whakapapa. Does the government really have, after all this time, zero concept of the importance of whakapapa? I don't understand it actually, because they would not do it to their own kids. They wouldn't do it to their own kids. No, it's true. They would not do it to their own kids. This is a policy that they know will have its greatest negative impact on Māori children and Māori whānau. They know that it will mean that more of our kids are taken and more of our kids will be unsafe. It is one of the most disgraceful policy decisions by government I've seen in a long time. We will oppose it. We will support the Māori Women's Welfare League and their treaty claim to oppose it on that basis. But Sir, just as a family person with kids of my own, attached to other families with kids of their own, there is no way that this legislation should proceed. There will be a fight on government's hands. They will not keep taking our babies off us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.